I rise today to speak on the nomination of Betsy DeVos for Secretary of Education. Public education is deeply personal for me. I am proud to have attended Michigan public schools, and I have 3 children who did so as well. I know firsthand the importance of a strong public education system. My father, Herb, was a proud teacher and taught English for 32 years in Rochester, Michigan, where I grew up. My father was part of the greatest generation. He fought for our country in World War II and returned home to help build America's middle class. Our nation owes these men and women a debt of gratitude for building a country where anyone who is willing to work hard and play by the rules can find opportunity. But too many families today feel that the American dream remains just out of reach. It seems that they can hardly get by, much less get ahead. In a time of growing income inequality, public schools can and do provide a ladder of opportunity in communities across the nation, urban, rural, and suburban alike. Strong public schools are vital to our economy, our democracy, and to our nation's global competitiveness. I think we can all agree that a child's chance to succeed should not be dictated by his or her zip code. While many crucial education decisions are made at the state and at the local level, the federal government also has a role to play in providing the necessary educational tools and proper protections for all of our children to flourish. We need a Secretary of Education who is dedicated to improving access to quality public education based on sound evidence and ensuring the proper implementation of federal laws designed to protect and to help all of our children. That is why, Madam President, I am deeply troubled by President Trump's nomination of Betsy DeVos of Michigan to serve as the Secretary of Education. Mrs. DeVos, like so many recent graduates, is effectively applying for a job. And like any employer, the American people should look at her resume, her interview, and her past performance. Mrs. DeVos's resume contains no experience in public education at any level, not as a teacher, not as an administrator, not as a student or a parent, not as a school board member, and not even as a borrower of public loans for college. Her only experience in education is her work lobbying for the transfer of taxpayer money to private schools and the rapid expansion of charter schools without sufficient accountability to parents and to students. So let's look at her interview. Her appearance before the Senate Help Committee last week raised many more questions and did not provide answers. During her confirmation hearing, Mrs. DeVos showed herself to be unfamiliar with some basic educational concepts, like the debate over whether we should measure students' success by growth or proficiency. Madam President, if Mrs. DeVos doesn't know how to measure success, how can she ever be expected to achieve success in our schools? Mrs. DeVos also appeared to have never heard of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, one of the most important pieces of education and civil rights legislation in our country's history. This law has provided access to education for children with unique needs and support their parents who depend on a law that Mrs. DeVos will be in charge of enforcing if confirmed. And it appeared as if this was the first time that she ever heard of this law just last week. So finally, let's take a look at her past performance. I am particularly troubled by Mrs. DeVos's longtime advocacy to funnel Michigan taxpayer dollars to private and charter school systems that are not held accountable for their performance. And let me be clear, our education system is far from perfect, and I support effective, innovative educational reforms that lift up our children, but these reforms need to be driven by facts and not ideology. Unfortunately, in my home state of Michigan, the charter school experiment has not lived up to the promises made. In fact, 65% of charter schools in Michigan fail, yes, fail, to significantly outperform traditional public schools in reading outcomes. In Detroit, 70% of charter schools are in the bottom quartile of Michigan schools. These are certainly not the results that we would want to replicate at the national level. But despite these outcomes, Mrs. DeVos stated during her confirmation hearing that she did not think that public charter schools should be held to the same standards as traditional public schools. Well, that simply doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense that many charter schools accepting taxpayer money not only perform worse than traditional public schools in terms of academic success, but also get to skirt laws that protect against discrimination and support disabled youth. We should hold all schools receiving federal dollars to the same level of accountability. Madam President, I have reviewed her resume, her interview, and her track record. And I have no confidence that Mrs. DeVos will fully support our traditional public schools, our teachers, our parents, and most importantly, our children, who only get one shot. They just get one shot to get an excellent K-12 education. Her approach to education has failed the children of Michigan, and her confirmation process gives me no reason to think that she will bring a more successful approach to our nation. American children deserve the opportunity for a quality education, no matter who they are and no matter where they live. And I stand with the many educators and parents in Michigan and across the nation when I say, Mrs. DeVos lacks the experience, qualifications, and the right vision to oversee our nation's educational system. Simply put, our children deserve a whole lot better. I cannot and will not support Betsy DeVos's nomination to serve as the Secretary of Education, and I hope my colleagues will join me in unity against her nomination.